Welcome to Win Games, Strategies for Success. Today we're looking at the Artemis Project. And as usual, I'm going to assume you already know how to play. We're going to talk about how to win. Now you might say in a game like this, with so much player interaction and a variable availability of resources, how can you have a strategy for winning? And that's true, you're going to have to vary it. But if you've ever gotten beat bad by somebody in this, you know they came in with a plan and then varied the plan based on what the game gave them. And that plan is what we're going to look at. But before we look at a plan, let's look at our goal. What are we trying to get? What does a winning board look like at the end of the game? So here's an idea of how it would score. At the end of the game, we hope to have very few resources. We don't anticipate getting any points from our energy or our mineral. It's just not an efficient way to win. Fully staffed buildings, however, are a goal, and we would like to have 3 to 4 fully staffed buildings at the end of the game, scoring us somewhere around 10 points. We want to have 7 total buildings to get the maximum 8 points. And when it comes to colonists, we hope to have 12 to 13 colonists, and we want them in sets. So if we get the 3 stewards, the 3 marines, 3 engineers, and 3 pioneers, getting 3 sets and scoring 9 points there is optimal. In a good game, you can actually get to that 4th set, and we'll talk about ways you might be able to do that. Expedition badges, we hope to have 5. 5 is not the maximum, but it's the most efficient way to score points with your dice. We'll get 3 points from expeditions if we can get to that 5th expedition badge, and we do not anticipate winning anything for having the most toolkits. But of course, in round 6, if it's available, take it. So how do we get here? Well, let's talk about what an optimal turn would look like. Well, over the course of the game, we're going to get to place 5 dice 6 times for a total of 30 actions, and we're hoping to acquire 7 buildings, 5 expedition badges, and 12 additional colonists. So on an optimal turn, we're going to pick up 1 badge, 3 to 4 energy, 3 to 4 mineral, 1 building, and 2 colonists. The 3 to 4 mineral should pay for the building. The 3 to 4 energy should pay for our 2 colonists. And the expedition will get us a badge. Now that would get us 6 buildings and 6 badges, so at some point we're going to forego the expedition to pick up a 7th building, and so max out that part of the victory point scoring. So why are we structuring our strategy this way? Well, the Artemis Project rewards balance. If you attempt to do one thing too much, then you max out. Too many buildings and you're no longer getting victory points for them. Too many colonists and you'll have to pay to heat them. Too many expeditions and you're no longer getting a return on that action placement. So by doing it this way, we make sure that all of our dice can contribute to victory points and that we don't get stuck in situations where it's suboptimal. How many victory points per action are we looking for? It's between 1 and 2. If we can ever get 2 victory points out of an action, that's a sure win. We want to make sure we always get at least 1 victory point, although it may not be obvious. For example, when I pull something from the vents or the quarry, it doesn't immediately result in victory points, but it allows me to recruit, which could get me victory points and cause my surface buildings to score. The other advantage to this strategy is that because you're acquiring approximately 2 colonists per building, your buildings will naturally fill up and score for themselves, and we'll avoid the movement restriction. Now, while this looks really neat and tidy, when there are multiple other players attempting to do the same thing, we're going to get jostled around. We're going to end up on the relief track. Where's our margin for error in this? Well, it comes from a couple of places, and the relief track is one. Oftentimes, when you get pushed to the relief track, you'll pick up 2 resources to make up for what you lost. Other places that we find our margin is in our starting values. We don't have to get exactly 4 resources from the vents every time we go there because we have some resources that we started with that can help recruit colonists. The biggest one comes from the expeditions. Expeditions can gain you resources, colonists, or even buildings that you don't have to pay for because you're already using a die to pick up a badge there. Another piece that helps us with that margin of error is a fully staffed ocean building. If we can pick up these ocean buildings and fully staff them, they will continually generate resources, which means we won't always have to get a 3 or a 4 from the vents and the quarry. We don't need to hit exactly all 5 of these each turn. If we go to the quarry twice, because there's a lot available there and people are fighting over buildings, the next turn we can perhaps pick up 2 buildings. And the last place we'll pick up our margin of error is by acquiring and using all of our resources, or most of our resources every turn. We have a very good chance of being the player who chooses who goes first. And we will always let the player to our left go first so that we get to place last. When you place last, you can potentially pick up a building for only 1 or 2 resources. Or you could drop something in the vents or quarry that gets you more. Or you can displace someone on an expedition and pick up those advantageous resources. So this being the big picture of a turn, what should our individual strategies be within each of these locations? This is obviously going to vary depending on the circumstances, but in general, if we get a 6, we want to send it on an expedition, and if we can, we want to send it early. It's possible for a 6 to get displaced, but often it means your opponent is either spending resources or additional actions to displace you. So if you can get a 6 there, go for it. Don't put a die into the expedition that could possibly be displaced by somebody else. For example, it would take a 4 to finish this expedition, but don't put it here if someone else still has a 5, because that can easily be pushed to the relief track. In addition, we want to heavily favor expeditions that offer resources, colonists, or buildings. Colonists and buildings are not a means to an end, they are the end. So if you see colonists there, it is okay to even send a second die on that expedition to ensure you get first pick, because this die is performing the work of the vents, it gets the resources, and the doorstep, it recruits the colonists. So it's more than making up for the fact that it's not somewhere else doing something else, if there are colonists or a building. If there are resources, that's also advantageous, because in addition to earning the badge, and we have to send a die here to get a badge, it'll allow you to put something smaller into the vents or the quarry. One final note on expeditions, it is generally not advantageous to send your colonists with dice on an expedition, because it takes 1 energy to heat them and keep them in the shelter and another energy to send them out. Even if they're an engineer, they're only paying for themselves. You're not gaining anything. In the vents or the quarry, the general principle is to send a 4. Now, of course, it's going to vary based on how many resources there are, but 70% of the time, the best play is to put a 4 in the quarry. And here's why we like that. On average, you're going to get 3 resources per person in either the vent or the quarry. In a 3-player game, it's 2.85. In a 5-player game, it's 3.02. But it's generally around 3, which means that's how much everyone can expect to pull and still leave enough for everyone else. When you put a 4 here, if you can get it there first, everyone else can only get ahead of you with 3s, giving them fewer resources than you. And if each player puts 1 3 there, there's a very good chance that you're still going to get at least 3, if not 4 resources out of it. In general, you want to look at how many items are in the area and then ask yourself, if each player put 1 die immediately below me, would I still get as much as them? And if they would, then that's a good die to put in that area. For example, in this case, if it's a 3-player game, if I place a 3 and 2 more 2s come in, those players will both take 2s and I will still get 3. But if I were to attempt to do this with a 4, when they both take 3, I'm left with 1. If it had left me with 2, I might be okay with that, because there's a good chance that I'll get 3 or even 4. But if it's leaving you with 1, you don't even get an advantage as good as the relief track. You don't always need to consider the immediately lower number if you look around and see that that immediately lower number is not available to some of your opponents. You can use that to calculate your best play. But if you'd rather not calculate, roll a 4, send it to the vents in the quarry. The gantry is the trickiest place to place a die, because buildings are so critical, both to victory points and to heating your colonists, and yet the market can vary greatly. We're expecting to pay 3 to 4 mineral per ocean building and 4 to 6 per surface building. But it's going to vary based on the availability of those minerals and how desirable the buildings are. If you can go last and poach an extra building for 1 or 2 mineral, that is an optimal play. In general, when you pick a building, you want to favor buildings that generate resources, or at least generate something. This will help with that margin of error when our dice don't get what we want from the vents or the quarry. The best ocean building is the surface conduit, both because of how many people it allows us to heat and because it produces a colonist. And remember, if you get a colonist that wasn't from the doorstep, you not only didn't place a die to get it, you also didn't have to produce the resources to recruit it. So we'll heavily favor that. Other good ocean buildings are those that produce resources. And later on down the line, of course, something that generates victory points is okay, but we probably aren't going to have a lot of extra mineral for generating victory points. In any case, always remember, a building is a building, and we need one or more than one every turn. When it comes to surface buildings, the optimal surface buildings, of course, are the 4 points that score the most. Because you've been recruiting sets of colonists, you're going to be more capable of staffing those. In addition, you're going to have the pairs necessary of the rare colonists to generate 4 points, and the pairs, or sets, that make your 3-point buildings valuable. Further down the line, we're not as interested in buildings that depend on resources to get victory points. The best number to place when we're going to the doorstep is a 3. If we can be the first person there with a 3, we'll get to recruit 2 colonists for a single action, and we'll get the best choice of the colonists that are there. We want to favor the more rare colonists, the stewards and the marines, followed by the engineer, and then finally the pioneer as needed. In the beginning, if you have enough resources and can get away with a 5, grab any colonist you can. Later then in the game, you'll be able to place your 1s and 2s there, recruiting just a single colonist, but getting first pick to fill out your sets. We're not going to go to the academy, and we're not going to go to the outfitters unless we absolutely have to. So let's take a look at what an opening sequence of turns might look like in a 3-player game. We're going to assume we're the blue player. We go second. We like both of the expeditions. Any of the buildings are good, the volcanic extractor being the best. We anticipate yellow going straight to the expedition. We won't go there because our 6 is still good. No one else has one. We'll jump in and get what we can from the doorstep. For our second turn, we don't see anything that we need to race for, and in order to stall and see what other people are doing, we'll now place our 6. We could have placed on the other expedition, but we don't want to give other people chances to get badges when we can get one and keep them from doing it. Now we're picking up 2 colonists, but only if we have 4 energy, so we need to get into the vents. Watch this misplay as we put a 2 instead of a 1. A 1 would have given us the resources we needed. Having played a 2, we're now stuck with 2 dice, neither of which is a good combination for acquiring mineral and bidding on a building, and we will be forced to use our toolkit. Yellow has decided to try to get 2 shots at a building, both cheap, one of which will likely get outbid, so they chose the least desirable building. We're not going to bid over that yet because we want to put some pressure on orange as well. So we'll go to the vents and get the 1 resource we need to make our toolkitted 4 good for a building. Orange then opts to outbid yellow, which is a good play. They acquire a building and force their opponent to the relief track. Yellow then comes back and bids on the next most desirable building, setting up an interesting choice for us. We will toolkit to a 4 and bid on a building, but watch what happens when we bid on the wrong building, desiring resources over displacing an opponent. After we resolve, you will notice that we could have put yellow in a much worse spot. Yellow will of course take the colonists, which they didn't have to pay for. We'll take the 2 victory, which we don't mind. More importantly, we picked up our badge. And noticed how things naturally balanced. Yellow got the best of the expeditions, both through the colonists as well as getting a badge. Through the vents in the quarry, Orange was able to acquire the most resources. When it comes to the buildings, we were able to acquire the best building. And then when staffing, Orange got the first 2 picks. Had we outbid Yellow on the building, we would be ahead of them in the race for buildings, ahead of Orange in the race for expeditions, and in addition, Yellow would have had to heat their colonists, using their resources. They also wouldn't have the toolkits they acquired from this building, which is going to put them in a position to outbid us in the next round. Regardless, notice how we've minimized our resources, so that we will be able to pick Orange to go first the next round, giving us the critical final play. And that's how you win the Artemis Project. Have fun, good luck, and thanks for watching Win Games.